I'm going to call the November 21st, 2023 meeting of the White Bear Lake Conservation District Board to order. We have a quorum. Thank you all for being here. We're called to order. So we're on to item 3, approval of agenda. Does anybody have any adjustments that they would like to make to the agenda? And I'll start. I'd like to add under new business, I'd like to add administrator salary. And does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to the agenda? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Approval of previous board meeting minutes. Does anybody have any adjustments that they would like to make to the October 17th, 2023 meeting minutes? Okay, would anybody like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the October meeting minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes. Public comments. Each meeting we reserve 15 minutes for items that are not on tonight's agenda. And would anybody like to take advantage of that 15 minutes? Okay. Then we'll move on to new business. And a first item under new business, summary of Eurasian water milfoil survey and treatment. Steve McComas. And would you like to make an introduction here, Mike?
Sure. I would like to welcome Steve tonight. He's been, with this warm fall, he's been really busy, so we're lucky to have him.
Not that busy.
But he's got lots of information to give us. So go ahead, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Board, and thank you, Mr. President. Pleasure to be here again. I've had the opportunity to work on White Bear Lake for a number of years. What a great working space this has been. So I was going to start with right out with a slide. And what we did in June is actually with the help of Mike as well, because he knows the lake better than I do, that's for sure. Was able to pinpoint areas where he's seen Eurasian milfoil. So what we do early in the season in June, just as milfoil is kind of starting to peak, we'll go around the lake and check out the areas where we see light, moderate, and heavy growth. And then what we do is we will mark that with a handheld GPS, a spot, and we'll note if it's a light, heavy, or moderate growth of Eurasian milfoil. Then we get all these points, and last year we had about 500 points. And so that's a very extensive survey. We go in a zigzag pattern around the lake. It's called the meander survey. And then when we get back to the lab, we download the points onto the map. We associate each of those points with an Eurasian milfoil density of a 1, 2, or 3, light, moderate, or heavy growth. And that's the map that we see next after this. And so what we did is, based on that, you can see up there, we ended up with 16 areas that could be treated for Eurasian milfoil. And that other line, those black dots, are sites without milfoil, and the black line is basically the boat track that we took around the lake. So we circled the whole entire lake. Mike is saying, I think you better check out this area over here, and sure enough, more often than not, there'd be some milfoil there. We'd mark it as a light, moderate, or heavy growth. If we had moderate and heavy growth, the yellow dots and red dots, and they were kind of clumped together, we would circle that up for treatment, and that's how we got our treatment areas. Often, if we saw milfoil, but it was a light growth, and in late June, June 27th, we figured that would not produce heavy growth by the end of the summer, so we didn't circle that up and we didn't treat it. So we don't treat all the milfoil in the lake. We treat what is going to be predicted to be heavy or nuisance growth. So those are the 16 areas. We treated on the treatment date, I think, was July 18th. And then about a month later, 4 weeks later, we went back out to check not only the treatment areas, but also all the other areas around the lake to see if did we miss anything, did some milfoil come up that we weren't aware of. And so this map here, August 9 and 10, that we assessed the Eurasian milfoil and looked at the treatment areas. We went back to all the treatment areas to check to see, did we get good control? Was there a problem? And also we wanted to know if there was milfoil growing any place else in the lake that we might have missed. And so here are the 16 areas, and you can see that for the most part we had very good control. There's a couple sites, a couple areas, 9, 10, and then there's I think an area up here number 6. We had a couple of yellow dots. So that's moderate growth. So the milfoil was dinged, but not really knocked out completely. The rest of those sites, we had very good control. It would not be a problem for navigation nor for recreation. And so for this year, by the end of the year, for the most part, Eurasian milfoil we had pretty good control. Now, it was an interesting year from the standpoint that native growth was also very abundant. So milfoil was under control. If there were some weedy areas in the lake, more often than not, it was probably native plants. Native milfoil. There was still some native milfoil in the lake. Water stargrass was big this year. And in the shallow water, a lot of times water celery, which is another native plant. It's that ribbony lake plant. And that was pretty abundant as well. Good. So here is Eurasian milfoil under light to moderate growth. And this is the type of milfoil that we would not treat. If it was 3 or 4 feet or more below the water surface, so it wouldn't be tangled up with the prop, and if we had single stems like this where it wasn't branching, that type of a plant density, that type of a Eurasian milfoil density is very similar to native plant density. So then we wouldn't treat it. The areas that we did treat are areas where you would have milfoil bunched together, a lot of stems, and branching. And the branching is what forms kind of the surface mats and forms a navigational and sometimes a recreational problem for skiers, for sailors, and just even for some fishermen. But this right here is basically native habitat, or it's similar to native plant in that native plant habitat. Well, over the years, if we look at the next slide, what we've done, and this was based on recommendations from the board a number of years ago. They said, well, where has milfoil been growing other places in the lake? So we took all the treatment sites for the last 10, 12 years and put them on the map. You can see there's some patterns. Some areas of the lake have produced Eurasian milfoil, heavy growth, to be treated almost on an annual basis, but not every place. And from year to year it varies. You can see that the number of acres treated is in that table, and that varies from year to year. But if you look at those polygons, they're called, where we've circled up treatment areas, you can see that in the west lobe there, some milfoil is pretty persistent out in the middle. Along the southwest shoreline there, those areas are areas, but not every year and not the whole shoreline. That's why we want to make those delineations every year, because one year we might have 10 acres to treat, the next year we might have 50 acres. And so we want to save money. 2, no need to treat if it's light growth. So this last year we did treat 47 acres. And that is down a little bit from years past, a little bit more than in 2022. Again, that varies from year to year based on everything from sunlight and ice goes out. We have had some zebra mussel impacts clearing up the water, and also lake levels are another factor. The years where we had some of the highest treatment areas or acreages are years where we had lower lake levels, better sunlight penetration, and that was combined often with even some zebra mussel dynamics as well. So if we look at the next slide, we can kind of compare what we treated this year in 2023 with the long-term pattern. And you can see that it hits mostly the same areas. They're pretty consistent, but it's just that it varies in size from year to year. So we have a pretty good idea of where milfoil is going to be kind of a perennial growth in that perennial growth pattern, and that helps zero in on the milfoil. The next slide, I believe, shows then kind of the long-term, kind of the historical herbicide use. Starting back in 1988 when milfoil first came in. And by 1998, it had pretty much spread around the lake. And then since then, it's just been variable. Some years very high, other years a little bit lower. Some of the highest acreages that were treated were at some of the lowest lake levels. And since the lake levels have come back, now we're into a little bit of a different pattern. It goes up and down, but at a lower acreage that has been treated. And you can see on that table on the right was just the acres treated over going back to 1988. When I first came in and found a single stem in 1988, and then from there, kind of took off. Well, the next slide is we did a point intercept survey that was sponsored by the Watershed District. Each one of those dots there on that grid pattern on the lake could be sampled. We didn't sample in 50, 60 feet of water, but we sampled out to 25 to 30 feet, and we found plants growing to about 23 feet, which is really very good. Also, at each of those points, when we saw milfoil, then we'd mark it. So we got a good milfoil distribution in 2023. And you can see that it's still fairly widespread around the lake, but those are all green dots, indicating, single stems, light density, not much different than the native plant community at those points. So it also indicated that our delineations and assessments are probably pretty good, and that we hit the worst of the milfoil growth for 2023 and in previous years actually too. One thing we did too, along with this point intercept survey where we were sampling each of those points, we would note if we saw any zebra mussels on any plant stems. So if zebra mussels were attached to plants during our sampling, we would mark that. And so we made a map of that. So we got basically a milfoil or a zebra mussel distribution in White Bear Lake, and here's what that looks like on the next slide. Those red dots are just presence, absence of zebra mussels. So as you can see, they're pretty well distributed around the lake. Maybe on that west lobe, not quite as abundant, but they're still present. Now, one of the things that this can do for us is that this sets a good benchmark. So in 2023, here's the zebra mussel distribution. These point intercept surveys are done about every 4 or 5 years, kind of sponsored by the Watershed District. Next time we do one, who's ever surveying can use the same grid pattern, because now it's pretty well established, and then also take a look at the zebra mussels' presence or absence. Eventually, the zebra mussels will probably going to start to decline in distribution and also in abundance. So this will help track the zebra mussel community as well around White Bear Lake. So that's how we kind of looked at zebra mussels this year. We also did look at the presence or absence of starry stonewort. That's a plant that's starting to expand a little bit in Minnesota. It's a macroalgae. It's like these bottom carpet type plants. It's not really rooted. It's an algae. It's a macroalgae. It's a bit like another plant called Cara, which is a native plant. But starry stonewort, if we look at the next slide, and Lake Coronis down there, that's the first lake in Minnesota where they found starry stonewort. But by the time they found it in Lake Coronis, it had already been found in about 150 acres. We've been kind of monitoring starry stonewort in Lake Coronis for their lake group. And in 2021, it was out to about 700 acres. And in 2023, starry stonewort was covering 800 acres in Lake Coronis. It's a pretty big lake. It's 3,000 acres, so it's about the same size as White Bear. The problem with Lake Coronis is we didn't find it till it already had been pretty well established at 150 acres, and then it just expanded from there. This mat is on the right. That's a Lake Corona starry stonewort mat. That mat is about 2 feet thick. So if you bring your boat into your lift and you're in 3 feet of water and starry stonewort is growing up to 2 feet to 3 feet, you don't have much open water there. And plus any prop action fragments that, and that can each fragment is a cell, and it can start a new growth someplace else in the lake. That's one way you can get around the lake. So what we did for white bear, we know that in 24 out of the 26 lakes in Minnesota with starry stonewort, it's been found at the public access. So what we did is we went around to the 3 main public accesses, or 3 accesses in white bear, and did rake sampling and visual observations around the public access, took 50, 60 samples to see if starry stonewort was present. And so at those 3 accesses, the Metasha, the Ramsey County, and the VFW launch site, did not find any starry stonewort. So at this point, we haven't found it. Based on what we know at this time, starry stonewort is not present in white bear. But we keep on checking it on an annual basis because the key is to find it early before it spreads. I'm working on several other lakes in Wright County and in Stearns County where it was found early at the public access. It's been treated, and going on 6-7 years in a couple of these lakes, it's not expanded past the public access. It's about a half acre. One lake has a couple acres of starry stonewort, but it's been contained at the public access without spreading out to these other lakes. Lake Sylvia, Pleasant Lake in Wright County, Clearwater Lake in Wright County. Stearns County has a couple as well. Lake Coronis is it's up there in Stearns County. So that is the starry stonewort situation, so that's good news for white bear. So just to kind of summarize, we have a pretty good system set up, and as long as the next slide shows, as long as we have Mike Pronto helping us as well, and I think Meredith has been out, and anybody else who's available could always come out and take a look too. But we've had a pretty good system of being able to track Eurasian milfoil and manage it. Zebra mussels, not much we can do to reduce the number, but we can certainly track it. And as zebra mussels densities go up and go down, it tells us something about what we might expect in the lake as well down the road in terms of other plant growth and things. And then the starry stonewort, which we do in conjunction with the Eurasian milfoil delineation and assessment. We can stay on top of that as well. So that is kind of the summary of Eurasian milfoil, zebra mussels, and starry stonewort. Any questions?
I have one.
Sure.
On the zebra mussels, this was the first year you've documented that for white bear then?
Yes, right.
And then we'll ongoing, because I remember you were talking about, like, it is a cycle.
Right.
And they filter water and they die off, and I've started to see that as the... But I've seen that cycle already where I live. It's like they're starting to die down and they're washing up on shore, and it's gotten less. So,
oh, yeah.
But I didn't. This is the first year we've actually documented it to see where they're at.
Yes, the DNR has done some work, but not systematically like this around the whole entire lake.
Got it.
And another indicator, some other evidence is that the chlorophyll concentrations in white bear for 2023 averaged 3 parts per billion. That is extremely low. We've had enough zebra mussels with the filtering action. They take the algae, the edible algae, right out of the water, and while they're eating it. And so as the chlorophyll, as the algae is filtered out, then the clarity increases. But they've taken the algae down so far that they're starting to get food limited, dying back, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing some of the empty shells or gaped shells on the shoreline washing up. And so that'll probably, I suspect, another 5 years, that map will be a lot different. There'll be fewer red dots as the zebra mussels then start to decline and decrease. They won't be eliminated from the lake, but they will be they'll be less abundant and less dense, and their distribution will decrease.
Other questions? Mike?
You had mentioned starry stonewort, but then I think in your report there was like something you found similar to it?
In my report, yeah, that was Cara, the native plant.
Okay.
And we kind of showed them side by side because Cara, starry stonewort, looks a lot like this native plant. So they're both Cara in the Cara family, starry stonewort and the Cara. Cara is also called muskgrass, and we have a fairly abundant. We have a lot of Cara in White Bear Lake, which indicates that the conditions are probably good for starry stonewort growth. That's why we do kind of want to keep on top of the starry stonewort searching and possible early detection if it does come in.
Okay. There's been some articles about crayfish in the paper, and it seems like there's a signal crayfish and a rusty crayfish. Is that something that we're susceptible to?
Oh yeah. They would live in White Bear. I've done a lot of work with rusty crayfish up in Wisconsin, and they're plant eaters, believe it or not. They're one of the few crayfish that will actually take out aquatic plant beds. That's not a good thing, because if they take out our plants, the plants really help with water clarity and everything else. So they will decimate our plant beds, and then the rusty crayfish don't burrow. All our native crayfish burrow. That means if you see them in a creek or even see them in the shoreline, they'll scoot out. I mean, they're always within about 10 feet of their burrow. And so their first reaction is just to scoot and escape, but oftentimes they get eaten. So the crayfish population, native crayfish, are actually pretty low in lakes. Rusty crayfish have oversized claws, and fish recognize that. And rusty crayfish don't burrow, so they stand and fight. So what they'll do is they'll go back on their haunch on that tail, and they hold up their claws like this, and it scares the fish away. And so if they're not being eaten, and there's plenty of plants, then their population just explodes, and that bottom can just be like moving with rusty crayfish. So we don't want rusty crayfish in White Bear. They're not down in the metro area. They're up in some other lakes up north, and we kind of track them. Now, there is some good news there with rusty crayfish, and that is, with time, native fish will finally figure out that they can scoot around, and if they get them from behind and avoid those claws, they'll start eating them. So there is some predation pressure from the native fish. Ultimately, looks like it can control rusty crayfish, but it takes 10, 20 years. So,
is it something you treat, or just let nature?
Wisconsin, I was working with a lake group, and they set out crayfish traps, trying to trap them down. And you can get these. Really, if you've seen a minnow trap, those little funnels they have in the wire cages. You bait them with some chicken liver, and it'll attract those rusty crayfish. And you can get hundreds of them. And they've been boiling them. I mean, they've been trying to use them as a food source and stuff. But you get a lot of them, and it's a very intense effort. And eventually, they just kind of say, "Forget it." And what's kind of happened then is we found out that after a number of years, the native fish really are the better controls than what we can do by trapping them. There just isn't a good market for them either.
Other questions? Scott?
Yeah. Getting back to the starry stonewort. So if you detect it, it needs to be immediately treated with some sort of algicide?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Copper sulfate's been the best.
Yeah. Now, because you'd have to, we would need money to treat it. Mm-hmm. So it means we need a cash reserve for the day it shows up.
Right.
Do you have any idea how much it would cost in that kind of scenario?
Sure. Typically, it's running about $1,000 an acre, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less than that. And so the first infestation should be an acre or less. And Clearwater, we found it up in Clearwater, but we found it kind of late. It wasn't even at the landing. 24 out of 26 lakes at the landing. Clearwater was one of those lakes where it wasn't at the landing. We just found it in another survey. It had been there for a couple of years, so we had to treat about 2.5 acres. But at the other lakes, we're treating 0.5 acres, 1 acre, 1.2 acres. So we're not treating too much, but you do want to treat it 2 or 3 times a year. because starry stonewort produces these little things called ball bills, and those are not killed with copper sulfate. Copper sulfate will kill the cells, the thallus, it's called, but the ball bills, which are kind of a hard part, not really a seed, but acts like a seed, those are not impacted, so they'll sprout again. So that's why you want to treat it 2 or 3 times a season. So there's that type of a cost.
Yeah, so if you had 5 acres and you had to do it 3 times a year, and it's $1,000 an acre, is what, $15,000 we'd have to spend, and we'd have to have that kind of money in reserve for immediately address it when it appears.
I think you would want to consider that. Okay,
well that's
because in Coronis, they're treating about 200 acres a year, and it's about but when you get that quantity, its price comes down, but it's still $500-600 an acre. So even though there's that cost, it's not nearly the cost that it would be if it got out of the containment area and spread around the lake.
Yeah, does Coronis, in Coronis, they use mechanical means?
Nope, they tried some mechanical harvesting, but that just kind of fragmented it, and they found that copper sulfate is the best. Now what we can do for any infestation of starry stonewort, because it grows right at the bottom, it's kind of a clever little thing. We can get an applicator to put the copper sulfate solution and chill it in the boat. So the water temperature is low, it's 30, 40 degrees. And then they have these drop hoses which deliver the copper sulfate solution right down to the bottom. Because the solution is colder than the lake water, it's denser, so it sinks. And so you get good contact right on top of the starry stonewort. And that's been pretty effective.
Is there any issue over time with copper or sulfur accumulation in the lake bed?
Good question. We're not too concerned about the sulfate with the copper sulfate, but the copper will build up. However, you would need you'd have to have a treatment for decades for the copper to build up to the point where it could be a factor. Copper is inactivated relatively quickly in lakes because it precipitates with carbonate, forms copper carbonate, precipitates, and acts like basically a rock. So it's very inert. And the only way it could become free again, free copper is what is toxic. To get free copper, you need a really extreme high pH or extreme low pH, and we just don't get that. So it's pretty much inert.
Okay, thank you.
Meredith, do you have a question?
Yeah. How often were they checking Lake Coronis? How did it get to 125 acres before it was found?
Well, it had not been found any place in the state. So some of the previous plant surveys, they probably didn't identify it as starry. And then on Coronis, because it was not really part of a lake or water, it didn't have routine plant samples, it just wasn't really ever sampled that much. The DNR actually found it in the course of a plant survey they were doing. And then when they looked around further, they said, oh man, it's pretty widespread. So it probably had been in there 8 to 10 years before they found it initially.
And then have you seen any good public education, any of these lakes that have starry or any lakes that are trying to prevent starry from coming in? Have you seen anything that you think is particularly effective or interesting?
We're doing an okay job right now with public information education in terms of, clean your boat and make sure that your trailer is also, weed free. And then our inspectors hopefully will give, some of that information out as well. That's probably our best tool right now for prevention. And then what I would suggest is that for the inspectors on White Bear Lake, any lake that a boat's coming from where it's been on, with a starry stonewort lake in the past, in the last week or two, they should check that boat very carefully. Starry stonewort does not live very long out of water. It's not like Eurasian milfoil or zebra mussels. They can live, 5-10 days out of the water. Starry stonewort probably doesn't live more than maybe a day or so out of the water. It dries up and then it'll die. So it doesn't come back to life. So that's one of the advantages that we have for maybe controlling the spread.
have a question on the crayfish. How are they transmitted lake to lake?
Probably as bait. And so fishermen reckon, crayfish, native crayfish are an okay bait. Well, rusty crayfish, for a lot of folks, if you don't recognize them as a rusty crayfish, you can use that as a bait. Get it out of one lake, especially if it's plentiful, take it to the next lake and for bait. And then when you're done, typically you dump it. So they're not able to crawl, and they're, from lake to lake, they're not able to they don't really attach onto plants. So it's probably by bait transfer more than anything else.
Sherry?
Yes, in a recent White Bear Press article, you had mentioned that in Lake Minnetonka they found a hybrid water or milfoil that between our native and Eurasian. And so my question is, how does that impact the lake, and would that be treated any differently than Eurasian, or how would you treat that?
Good question. Yes, northern milfoil and Eurasian milfoil do hybridize. And so there's a number of lakes that have hybrid milfoil, which is a cross between native, northern, and Eurasian. And the hybrid is treated as an invasive species, just as it would be Eurasian milfoil. And so we've done some testing in white bear. There are some hybrids in white bear, but they act a lot like Eurasian milfoil to a degree. And they're finding, this is rare, but they're finding some of these genotypes and some of these crosses, because you can back cross. You can get a hybrid that'll back cross with another hybrid, then you get a whole different type of a genotype. Some of these genotypes they're finding are hardy and not as susceptible to herbicides as some of the pure Eurasian. So it's something that I'm tracking that as well. So far, we're okay in White Bear Lake, and our hybrids are not resistant to the herbicides that we're using at this point. But it's always something to kind of keep. We'll keep tracking that. So that's a good question. There's been a lot of hybrids found in Lake Minnetonka, or at least 7 or 8 species.
Any others? Okay, I have just a couple. So is there anything that you think that the Conservation District should be doing to monitor things that we're not currently monitoring but would be helpful for us to monitor? And then I'll just build on that for a moment. We have one area of the lake which has septic systems, and then we have another, like Commercial Bay, is very active with, boats and fuel, oil, that kind of thing. And do you think there's any testing that we should be doing or monitoring that we should be doing in regards to any of that?
Well, it turns out that early in my career in Chicago, I've evaluated thousands of septic tanks for their impacts on lake water quality and also just on public health. Unless you have a surface failure with your septic tank, which means you have septage flowing overland into the lake, anything you can get into the ground, you get 90% removal of nutrients and 100% removal of the E. coli. So unless there's a surface failure, septic tanks are a very minor component, especially because they're such a small part of the lake, structure, that the lake volume, that septic tanks are probably okay. So we would certainly, from a public health perspective as well, if ever there was any indication of a surface failure, wet grain fields and things like that, that would be immediate need for some action. So that is certainly a factor there. But that would be a factor, but I'd say a relatively minor potential problem for white bear. Commercial Bay, there's a lot of boats there. We did a study on Lake Sylvia a couple of years ago, and if you want, I can forward it to you. Their question was, the boats and the uncombusted petroleum products, gas, and everything else, is that a factor? Is that any public health concerns in a lake? And so we sampled a bunch of different spots. We were right by public accesses, and that was a real active access. Maybe not as active as the county access or Mataska, but still, 150 boats over the weekend would be pretty typical. We sampled right there on a weekend, and the results came back. There were no signs of any petroleum, gasoline products or their breakdown products. So that's good news too. Boat motors these days are running a lot more cleanly than they were maybe 30, 40 years ago as well. So from that standpoint, we're in pretty good shape, I think. If we didn't find anything there, the odds are that it's not a big concern for Commercial Bay or other areas of the lake. There is some concern coming down the road for the PFAS. But unless there's a known source, where there's been some firefighting, training going on, and a lot of foam was used, and that runoff is going to go into the lake, we probably don't have a big concern. No more than any other lakes that are in the area as well. The lakes where they do have PFAS concentrations that are of some concern, almost always associated with some firefighting training, sometimes on an air base, especially up in Duluth, military air bases where they train with foam, and that's that runoff. Those are the systems that were probably a little bit higher and had elevated levels of PFAS, which is, it's a kind of a Teflon product in simple terms. But by nature then, the reason why it's used too, it's also very inert. And they're working now, you need very high concentrations to have any type of health impacts. But we're still a concern, and there are some trigger levels that are being developed by EPA, so we're tracking that.
And is anybody sampling for PFAS in White Bear Lake?
Not in White Bear Lake. There's been a handful of lakes, maybe in Minnesota, and other lakes here and there. So far, we can find PFAS in a lot of systems, but at very, very low levels. And that's can come from almost atmospheric, from a variety of sources. We have a small watershed for White Bear. I would suspect that we're on the low end of any PFAS levels in the lake. But the metro area, there's been some PFAS found. Sampling has been relatively minor by the MPCA.
And with the whole water gremlin thing and the TCE, do you think that's something we should sample for, be concerned about, deposition of that in the lake?
That's a good question. And, when that came up, when that kind of hit the news, I immediately took a look at the water gremlin site. Fortunately, for White Bear anyway, they are on the west side of the lake. And our groundwater flow in White Bear is from east to west. So our groundwater flow is actually away. That gremlin site would be in a setting where groundwater is flowing away from White Bear. There'd be very little chance of any water gremlin contaminants, whether it's lead or anything else, hitting the groundwater and then coming backflow into White Bear. It's going the other direction. So from that standpoint, we're in good shape.
Okay, and then chloride. I know that we sample for chloride in White Bear Lake, and that's trending in a certain direction. And how do you see White Bear Lake comparing to other lakes in that regard?
That's a good question. I was thinking about that too, because typically I put a little water quality section into our report, but it's a little bit too. Those data aren't all back yet, but talking to the Watershed District, and I think Matt Koshin mentioned that he might have sent you some information too. Again, water from chlorides, the problem with chlorides is that they're biologically inert. Nothing really uses them, takes them up. They don't absorb any sediments or soils. They're just there. The only way you can reduce their concentration is by dilution. So you want to make sure that we don't have a constant input of chlorides. However, we do have roads around here, and so the chloride levels in White Bear are increasing gradually. But because we have such a small watershed, that levels, I'm looking at concentrations back in '88, they were around 20 parts per million chlorides, and in 2023 they've increased up to about, what is that, about 45. So that is that's a pretty typical increase in chlorides for a lake throughout the whole metro area and actually throughout the whole state. And on top of that, those chloride levels are actually lower than most lakes, and that's due primarily because our watershed is so small. We don't have a lot of drainage water coming in. And even though we have some roads going by, that's a factor. That's a source of salt. Not nearly as bad as some lakes next to an interstate. They're using 100,000 pounds a mile of salt, and so that's a bigger factor. So a lot of lakes in the metro area are have higher chlorides. I think the threshold for where you start getting impairment is about 260 parts per million, and we're at about 45. So we're well below that threshold.
Yeah, but it never goes down.
Right.
Never goes down unless you can knock out the source of all chlorides, and then eventually rainwater and stuff would dilute it, and then they'd go down that way. But since '88, when they started monitoring, levels have not gone down. But it's a pretty typical trend for most of the lakes, especially in the metro area, and probably statewide.
So just two more, and then I'll be done. Signal crayfish. You talked about the rusty crayfish.
Yeah.
And anything we should know about signal crayfish?
Well, they're big, so we don't know much about them. What they'll do in the in our lakes, they are a regional exotic crayfish, meaning that they're not coming from Europe and anything else. They've been in the United States, but they're a regional non-native species, and that is their native range, I think, is down south. I'm not sure on that, but their native range, we have signal crayfish in the United States that are native. It's just that when they get out of that geographic range, they can be a problem. Yeah, they would have some impact maybe from the standpoint of excluding any native crayfish and things like that. They're a little bit like the red swamp crayfish. That's also a invader, and it's just that they can outcompete our native crayfish and take over and decimate the native crayfish. That's probably one of the main ecological problems. So we want to keep them at bay as well.
Okay. And then last question. Is there anything that you would like to know more about regarding White Bear Lake? Like anything of interest that you think, wow, I wish I knew more, or wish we knew more about this or that?
Well, a couple of things that come to mind. One is a trend analysis. White Bear, we have an increasing trend on chlorides. How are other factors, how are other parameters working in White Bear? What's the trend for fish, for walleyes, muskies? What's the trend, long-term trend on Eurasian milfoil or native plant species? Are they increasing, decreasing over time? Where are we sitting there? Well, I think we have a lot of that information. Lake use, boat traffic, things like that. Is that increasing, decreasing? So things like that, a trend analysis would be kind of interesting as well. And maybe one thing else that I'm seeing more and more happening at national conferences and everything else, there's a lot of buzz on toxic algae. Does White Bear have any toxic algae? And actually we don't. If we do, 3 parts per billion of chlorophyll, even if some of that algae is toxic, it's so low they don't have any impact on any of the organisms. But what we could do, what might be kind of interesting over time, is to collect a water sample in June. For example, if you're doing a milfoil delineation, collect a water sample, top and bottom, and have that water sample analyzed for algae composition. What kind of algae species do we have in the lake? And see how that might change over time. Are the zebra mussels having an impact on the algae? Or the species composition, is it changing? Do we have any toxic algae species, which are the cyanobacteria? If we do, what kind are they? And then also what we're finding is that algae can be very different from the top of the water and the bottom water. So I'd collect a water sample in the top and collect a water sample down near the bottom, have that early in the summer, see what the species composition is, and then come back in the fall or in August or September and see, are the blue-greens, have they really taken off? Are they a big factor? Or are they decreasing? Or are they not there at all? And Powderhorn Lake, we don't have to do it at this level, but they sample every 2 weeks for algae composition. And over time, they found when they had the best water quality in Powderhorn Lake, they had no blue-greens. The blue-greens, for some reason, were not present at all. That was when they had the best water quality. When they had high levels of blue-greens, that's when the water quality was poor. Now, water quality in White Bear right now is an A+. I mean, we're one of the better lakes in the whole metro area for sure, top 5. And so we don't have a big problem with nutrients and blue-green algae, but we do maybe want to keep tracking that. Because the question will come up from the public too, because there's going to be toxic algae buzz, and it's going to be getting more interest too as we go on. So somebody asked, what is the toxic algae component in white bear? You could say, well, look at that. Comus, I don't do the analysis. We send that out because that is very specific and very particular. You need some pros doing that. But you get that back, and there's probably 20, 30 species of algae out in the lake, if not more. And how does that vary from year to year, and also even from season to season? And I think a couple of samples like that would be of interest. It costs about $150 per sample. So it's more than just a routine phosphorus sample and some of these or chloride, but I think the information long-term could be pretty informative.
All right, any other questions? Meredith?
Do you think anyone else is sampling for toxic algae? Would Rice Creek have the data or somebody else?
I don't think so. No. Minneapolis Parks, they do sample for toxic algae because they have a number of swimming beaches. And so they've been tracking it very carefully. A few other groups will do some sampling as well. Where most of the toxic algae sampling is being done is the East Coast, West Coast, down south, where they're closing beaches and things like that. We don't have to worry about that in White Bear. Our water quality is so good. But these more fertile lakes have more blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. And there's a potential there for toxic algae strain within a cyano bloom. Not all blue-green blooms are toxic, but there's strains of, there's some subspecies that will produce toxic compounds, metabolites, and we just don't know what those strains are. So not every blue-green bloom is toxic, but you treat it with caution if you do have a blue-green bloom. I don't think we've had a blue-green bloom in White Bear in decades. So we're okay that way. Basically, if your transparency gets less than 3 feet, that's when you start getting some concerns. Typically, a water transparency less than 3 feet is due to blue-green algae in August.
Mike?
This time of year, you hear fishermen and others talk about the lake turning over. Can you explain what that is and how that happens, what conditions are needed?
Oh, sure. Yep. Turnover. Turnover in a lake happens twice a year, fall turnover, spring turnover. Right now, we're in fall turnover. What happens is that we have, over the summer, the radiation, water warms up. So we have 60, 70, 80-degree water on top. It only goes so far. The sunlight only penetrates so far. So if a lake is deeper than 20, 30 feet, sunlight doesn't get down to those depths. And so that water is still kind of has winter temperatures. It's 30, 40 degrees down there. That water is dense, and it stays down there. The warmer water sits on top of that colder water. But now as temperatures drop and we're down, we get into the 50s to the 40s and into the 30s, as soon as the water temperature hits about 42 degrees, that is the same temperature as the water below it. And so then a little wind will mix the whole entire lake, and that's the turnover. So then you get the whole lake mixing with a little bit of wind action. Otherwise, in July and August, the wind action is only mixing the water on top of that cold water. It does not, it's so dense, it doesn't move with that top water. So you have the warm water circulating, but then when that warm water gets to the same temperature as the colder water, one density, then just a slight breeze can mix the whole lake. And then that's turnover. And that reoxygenates then the whole lake. And then you go into winter, and then you have some other reverse stratification, and then comes spring, you'll have another turnover episode too. So right now we're in fall turnover. And that sets up for other lakes, don't have to worry about White Bear, other lakes that don't have oxygen, that's the oxygen they're going to get, because as soon as the ice comes on, no more re-aeration, no more mixing, so then you got to make it through the winter with that oxygen that you got in fall.
Okay, any other questions for Steve? Okay, well, thank you, and thanks for all you do on behalf of all the lakes,
Sure.
but particularly White Bear Lake.
Again, it's a pretty good working environment out on White Bear Lake. So, No complaints on my end. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on. Minnesota law, new earned sick and safe time. Mike.
The state of Minnesota passed a law which takes effect January 1st. It's called the Earned Sick and Safe Leave Time. Employers have to provide leave to part-time and full-time employees who work in the state. So we have a part-time employee. Sick and safe time is paid in different ways, and we chose the simplest way to have it accrue and be paid, and the city does our payroll, and they also chose the same way to do it, so it only makes sense to follow suit. We pay it as it's accrued. So if every 30 hours you get 1 hour of this safe and sick time. You can accumulate up to 48 hours in a year unless the employer decides that they would allow more. You can carry it over up to 80 hours. Once you get 80 hours, that's supposed to be the limit unless the employer decides that you can go higher. So anyhow, I don't think those things are going to kick in, but we're going to do the accrued as worked system along with the city who does our payroll. And it's something that it's law, so we have to do it. So that's more information on what we're doing.
And can so we're talking about you, Sherry. Can Sherry, if she accrues this this time, can she cash it out at some point?
No, you cannot cash it out. It can only be used for sick, care for sick family members, or to seek assistance if an employee or their family member has experienced a domestic abuse.
Okay.
So it's sick leave or helping somebody with sick or a problem.
Okay.
I think what you can do, though, and at least when I worked for the state, is you can put in your notice and then take that time and get paid. So you put in your 2-week notice, that's 80 hours. You don't come in, you call in sick for 2 weeks, and you get paid.
Sure. Okay, any questions on that? And so do we have to, so it's a law, do we have to make a motion to, that we're going to handle it that way, or do we just say we're going to handle it that way? Al?
Curiously, you're looking at me.
Did we stump you?
We're looking at you.
Again, as Mike said, it's been passed, so it's part of state law. So you really don't necessarily have to affirmatively say yes, we're going to do this, because the consequences are you have to do it. So it is essentially an accrued version of FMLA. So you can, instead of saying I'm going to take time off unpaid, it's an accrual basis as you work. You just accumulate this. And so you can certainly take a motion to say that the way the city has set this up for their employees, you would like them to carry through and do it for our single employee that would be subject to the law.
Okay.
If you'd like. I don't think it's necessary. If you want a resolution, I can certainly draft that up for the next meeting.
Okay, but otherwise we don't need to do anything and it'll just happen.
I don't think so, because it's mandated,
Right.
We're just
mandatory.
following the law.
Yep. And it's convenient that we are handling payroll through a city that's doing it the same way, like Mike said. So,
Yep, agreed. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, moving on. Next item, administrator salary. So when we developed the 2024 budget back in June, we included an increase in the wage for our administrator, and I would like to make a motion that we increase the administrator's salary from $26 an hour to $28 an hour, which is what we had contemplated in the budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mike?
Starting January 1st.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I'll amend that motion, starting January 1st.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, so that passes. On to unfinished business, the VFW EAW. So we received another update of the VFW's EAW, but I think it's still missing. Is it still missing like the state report or something from the historical?
A heritage review.
Yeah.
And then also how to calculate that the carbon footprint section, which is, I did look at that. It's quite a lot.
Yep. So anyway, again, we have partial EAW in front of us. I guess I would suggest that everybody give it a look and let Sherry know if you have any comments on what we have in front of us.
Is there
And
really any relevant carbon footprint to adding some dock sections that would make any difference in a decision we might make or the DNR would make?
so I wonder the same thing. And I guess what I would say is, there are boxes in the form, that the EAW, the worksheet, that have to be checked, and so we just have to make sure we check those boxes somehow.
Yeah, we've been discussing this a long time, and I don't think it's going to have any impact one way or the other, how it gets filled out.
Right, it's just a matter of getting a complete EAW together at this point. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, we'll move on. Buoy placement and map. Meredith?
Okay, so in your packet, you have the map that we've all seen before and contemplated, and thank everyone for their contributions. We've seen it for a few months, and now it's time to approve it for public consumption. So I'd make a motion to approve the buoy placement map and buoy in and out dates for 2024.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and those buoy in and out May 1 and October 15th. Any discussion? Okay, Meredith.
I'll just say that this will go on our social media and will likely be published in the White Bear Press.
And maybe we put it on our website.
In our website as well.
I just want to say I was going to use a CAD program to kind of finish it off a little bit, and that's at home. We don't have one here, and I just didn't get a chance to do it, so I still want to use that to tighten up the dots and stuff.
Yeah, it could look a little nicer for publication. It's kind of hard to read.
All right, so Sherry's going to kind of formalize it a little more, and then that will be the document. But otherwise, we see where the buoys are. We see the in and out date.
Yeah, because at least in black and white, I can't tell the difference between the. Because what we're going to need for the first issue of the Laker next year is we're going to have a feature article on buoys, everything, where the buoys are, and what kind of buoys, and what do they look like, and how do you get, there's a lot to be said about buoys.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve this diagram. Any further discussion?
I have a question.
Yep.
Does this cover those buoys that were over off of, yes, it was Commercial Bay, off into the marsh area?
Right there, no white buoys.
Those are the three. But there were also some buoys that were put in there.
That doesn't cover these.
That doesn't cover
Nope.
these. So what do we do when those buoys appear next year?
Who put the other buoys out?
I have no idea.
Oh, they're red and green, so they don't hit a pile of rocks when you go around the corner of the...
So is that something we should be putting out there ourselves?
Yeah, and Susie, use your microphone there if you would. Thanks.
What's that?
Use your microphone when you talk. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Is that something that we should be responsible for putting out? Because I think they were small. They were not regulation size. They were, just put out there, and really it didn't say much on them, so you really didn't know what they were for either. So, I mean, if there was a red and green one out there that would have something painted on the side to tell you what they were, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, so the question is, should we add those buoys
That's exactly, yeah.
to this map?
And make sure that those, I mean, I think they were detergent bottles or something, weren't they? Were painted or something. I don't think they were.
They were round marker buoys, but they weren't, they didn't say anything on them.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we think about that?
Well, that would make us responsible for them.
Go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
Responsible for, Coke bottles or whatever out there as buoys.
Well, I think that I think we would buy buoys and use the proper buoys. I think is what we would end up doing.
I don't know. we could
I think
throw
that's what
shallow water
Meredith's been
buoy
wanting
on the
feedback,
rock
like
pile.
there's a spot, let's put it on the map and we can buy the buoys.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with that area. Is that,
There was a rock pile or
See where the
something
three
there.
no-wake buoys are?
oh, sure.
Kind of a little crescent, very small crescent.
Yep.
Just go beyond the last one, going out into the lake, about half as far as the others. About there.
Okay. So should we add those to the map? What's our interest? Okay?
I would do it.
Well, it wouldn't be a no-wake buoy, it'd be a shallow water buoy.
Yeah.
Right.
I would have nav buoys or whatever, like red and green tells you where to go. I mean, but just make them whatever, like you said, Susie, regulation or whatever, whatever's the right
Yeah.
buoy.
I mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean, the guy who puts them out there, it's because he doesn't want to run out over the rock with his pontoon.
I use them, yep, I would have something there. It's,
Yeah.
it's a-
But if there was,
Over in Delwood, there's a spot that uses them too, over in the corner on the south side of the peninsula. There's some homeowners that'll throw buoys out there off of Lake Jensen's
Those haven't been in for a few years.
since Lapidat's moved.
Okay, so those are some additional buoys that,
we had them, yep.
Those aren't in.
no, but these that we're talking about, that Susie raised. So we should get those on the map, we should buy buoys, we should be responsible for that? Is that what the board's interest is?
I would agree, yep, I would be interested in having it there. I think it should just be done right and be done.
one buoy or two?
2.
I think 4. I think there's he has 2 in the beginning of it and like 1 in the back where you just have a navigational path.
But
that
it
you
drops
can-
right off.
Well, I mean, I don't think we're going to spend that much on 4,
No.
right? We can look at it.
Okay. Well, we'll have to relook at that, how many we really, yeah.
Because it's shallow in the beginning, shallow at the end. There's just like kind of a little tunnel there, right?
Well, okay, so.
I don't want to go, I don't want to.
We got a red and a green buoy. People that know the lake know that you don't pass on red, you go on green. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Now, if we put shallow water buoys in a row, and you're saying you go through them, but we're telling everyone else you don't go through the shallow water buoys because you're going to run over the rock bar like our friend did this summer.
Yeah.
So we got to think about this a little bit.
I agree.
This is not as easy as it sounds.
I think we should figure out something, but we should probably take the onus to figure it out, right?
I think maybe one shallow water buoy on top of the rocks,
Could be
because
that.
there is just one rock pile.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
And then if our friend puts out a red and a green buoy, we can either leave them there or have them, but we'll have marked what we perceive as shallow water rocks.
Is there any reason why those rocks cannot be moved?
Well, the easiest thing in the world would be to go out there, because there's only about 30 or 40 rocks, pick them up and move them, but I don't think the DNR would like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you want to get your, black suit on and go out in the middle of the
No,
night.
thank you. I have no intention of doing that.
I won't tell.
No, I won't. There will be nothing to tell.
It'd be a good project for Susie.
Yeah, right. No, I don't
Okay,
think
so is the motion and the second, are you okay with the addition of this single rock buoy?
I think a single one wouldn't solve Chris's problems all the way, but it would keep people off the rock bar. At least you know you're not going to hit, because if you stay away from that buoy, you're not going to hit those rocks.
Open it however we're going to market it the best way. I'm fine either. We can try, see what happens.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. So one more dot after those shallow water buoys, and you got it.
Okay, so we have motion and a second to basically approve the plan.
Yeah, I'll amend my motion to include this extra buoy on the rock pile on the west side of the island.
And it was,
I agree with that. I'll second that again.
okay. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes. 2024 Lake Use Study RFP approval.
All right.
Meredith.
So everyone has a new document, which they received in their email today. Sorry that it's late. of it's just more eloquently written and for increased clarity, but there were 2 small changes in the scope since the last document that you received at the last board meeting. I'll explain those 2 changes. We're now asking for 6 days of summer data collection instead of a variable 4 to 6 that were in the last RFP. And we're asking the proponent to attend up to 4 board meetings if needed, or meetings with anyone on the board if needed. And there's one other change that I wanted to make to this. On the second page, the due date, I've talked to Sherry, and we could go as late as January 2nd, 2024, so that is going to be the due date. Does anyone have any question? Well, let's see. I'll make a motion to approve this RFP for public consumption.
I'll second it.
A motion and a second. And Meredith, just so that I wrote it down right, January 2nd, 2024 is the new due date?
Correct.
Okay.
That is the latest that Sherry could get it and be available. The bids be available. The proposals be available for us at the January meeting.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. And any discussion?
Any of those things that Steve McComas mentioned to test for tempt you to add in? Or even though it's a lake use study, there is mention of water quality.
Yeah. I wonder.
Can I chime in on that?
Yeah.
I think that the board ought to take what Steve said and really kind of digest that and come up with what I think of as more of a water quality kind of a sampling program, and then maybe work with Rice Creek or maybe with the DNR or some others to see how we can accomplish that sampling, as opposed to having the water quality be incorporated into the into the lake use.
Yeah,
that would be my
lake
preference.
use is separate.
Yeah, it seems that way.
And what Steve is talking about is good, but, it's almost like pure science, some parts of it that he's talking about. And even one gets like the U of M involved, it's a bigger deal.
Yep.
I'll say I agree with that, because this is going to be a one-time use, or once every 5 or once every 10-year thing that we do a lake use, and we will want to sample that stuff a little more frequently.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
May I thank Mark W., Alex, and Brian for your lots of help on this. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to you and your group for all the hard work. Okay. Now we're on to the reports and the executive committee report. The executive committee did meet. We discussed this sick leave policy. We discussed the buoy placement and removal and the in and out dates. And we discussed this proposal, this RFP, and some, things to do with the aeration devices that are put out on the lake. And then, the St. Germain Bay sign, we discussed that a little bit. Nothing real consequential, I guess I'd say. Any questions about any of that?
What is the status of the St. Germain Bay sign?
Well, we're still looking for a place to put it, but we keep kind of finding, the way it seems to me, I'm not actively involved in it, but it seems like we keep running into doors that are closed, but then some, little window opens, and so we investigate that, and Meredith is actually, and Mike, are working to find somebody that would be willing to have the sign located on their property.
The sign has not been made then, has it?
True, has not.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the Lake Quality Committee. Mike?
Lake level today is 922.15. Last year in November, it was 922.48, so it's down 3 3/4 inches, not very much, kind of holding its own this fall as it did last fall. Lake temperature today was 42 degrees. Last year, on November 15th, actually, our meeting was, it was 33 degrees. And the lake froze December 6th completely. So the lake might freeze a little bit later this year, kind of slowing down. Depends on the weather we get. That's it for that. I also applied with the DNR a grant for treatment of Eurasian water milfoil for 2024. So that grant application is in, and we'll just wait for the results.
Okay, any questions for Mike? Okay, thank you, Mike. Lake Utilization Committee, Mark?
So yes, I'll just go down the agenda. The first one was Special Olympics Minnesota Polar Plunge fundraiser. The LUC approved it unanimously. We do need to get some more paperwork from the sheriff, but that will come. So it's that they get that information in before the event happens. And then also to waive the fee because it's for Special Olympics charity. That's the motion to approve it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the application for the Special Olympics fundraiser. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes.
President Board, next on the agenda is Wipe Area Food Shelf Barely Open fundraiser. That's the golf event. It'll be held February 3rd. Everything was in order. The only thing I would like to change is that, again, because it is a fundraiser for the food shelf, that we remove the application fee. And I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the barely open application and without the fee. Any discussion?
No.
Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes.
Chair and Board, the next one is a VFW Post 1782, commercial permit revised from last year. LUC decided, and Chris has been doing almost all the work on it. We decided that should be tabled because just not all the paperwork is really there, and we've got some time for all that to get through. And the city has been working really well from what I understand, with the VFW and getting some things worked out. So we'd like to table that for this meeting. Next four are the City of White Bear Lake. The first one, Municipal Marina Commercial Permit Renewal, revised from last year. They asked for an extra boat for the Bear Boat, but since they've made an arrangement with the VFW to keep that boat in the VFW ADUA, that we don't see the need to put 161 boats. We'll just keep it at the regular 160 because that's what's in their ADUA.
And then the only other addition was there was some discussions between the VFW and the city on the fireboat. That's not going to happen in the ADUA right now, so that's why we came to 161. And then with the bear boating since we've never counted that, that's how we're getting to the 160. And it's really the same. The city was just calling out the bear boating boat just to make sure it was called out as a boat that was attached to the dock there.
So that's the motion for 160 boats and to stay within their 300 feet ADUA.
Second.
Changed on their application then?
Just a minute. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Susie?
Does that get changed on their application?
Yes, it will be
Currently it's
changed on their
162.
ADUA.
Okay.
And I noticed the motion was for boats, and do we want that to be slips?
Yeah, we should probably
The new verbiage slips.
use slips. Yep.
Sorry, I'll get there.
Okay, motion and a second. Okay, we've already said that. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes.
Mataska Park commercial permit renewal, same as last year, no complaints. LUC approved it, and I so move.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes.
Next would be Veterans Park Memorial Fishing Pier, same as last year. And with what's happening with these piers are that after next year, they won't have to re-permit them every year. But I would like to waive the fee because it is for public use.
Let's say that again.
You said after next year.
After this year, this would be the last year that requires permits for Lions Park and Veterans Park, or application. They'll just be,
So we're just trying to get a permit in so we can document it and say, here it is.
Here it is.
We have it, it's on record and all approved, because they're never going to change.
So if they ever do decide to change, then that would.
they would have to re-permit
They have to
them.
renew their
Yeah.
permit.
Okay. And did you make a motion and you're the second, Chris?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any discussion? One question I have is the line on the ADUA line between the city, the fishing pier, and the VFW. That doesn't seem to be in agreement with what RUD determined to be that ADUA line.
Yeah, that affects the VFW more than it does that pier.
Yeah,
It
so-
really has nothing to do with the pier, but we do have to work that out with the VFW when they permit.
But so we don't care if they brush up their figure for us. Next year they can.
I think
do that.
once we and I think they'll all have a question for you, Alan, where we want to follow up. We want to make sure the RUD diagram is right. I can make the assumption it is. I just want confirmation where it's if that's the case, then we can get that in the VFW permit, and then we talk to Rick where if everybody's in an agreement and says, here's the line, this is the line to start, right? Then people can go and revise it. But we didn't think it would harm Veterans Park, and two, since VFW is off the table, that's part of why we shelved it, is we want to figure out exactly what that line is to make sure. I'm assuming the survey's right. I just want to make sure it's I'm not the professional surveyor, right? Where it's we get some data on that and we say, yeah, this is correct.
And I think Sherry confirmed that with RUD that that is the correct line.
Yeah.
Okay. That the line should be moved. I should say that their survey is correct.
Is correct.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay. That passes.
Next is Lions Park permit. We've not had one before, so we asked them to fill out an application for a permit just so we would have it on record, as Chris stated, so we know we have some record that it is there and we know it's there. And I would also like to add that we waive the fee because it is for public use. And I so move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes.
Next is Tally's Dockside commercial permit renewal, revised from last year. LUC approved the 64 boats. They asked for 67.
Yep.
And so what we would like to do in this case is approve the 64 and then have them come back with a variance and reasoning why they want the 3 other boats. So basically, Tally's would stay within the 300 feet and stay within their ADUA and have the 64 boats. Slips.
Yeah, slips.
Slips.
Okay, so is that a motion?
And I so move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? Meredith?
I have some questions. So if we're approving 64 slips, does that dock shorten then?
No, it stays within the 300 feet.
They take out 2 slips, the dock is,
You don't shorten the dock. They would still have their dock there from the diagram. So if you took out 51 and 52, just those would be open spots. No boat
like
would be
slips.
Well,
Not permanent.
Maybe transient
you could
slips?
make them transient too. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
They would not be permitted slips.
Okay. And then I have a question on the gas dock, the one that borders the docks of White Bear. I know that we had had them shorten it last year. this year we're saying they can go out to 300, whatever they want to do?
We're saying since they're butting each other, it's probably safer to have them the same length. Because if one was shorter than the other, it's like, then we'll have people from, Tally's probably docking on docks of White Bear, so it's just like if we can keep them similar, keep the borders the same, it would probably work the best.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I was just wondering about their insurance.
We got.
He's going to get it to me.
Okay. It's going to be-
Again, yes, insurance, everybody has different timing of insurance, and so I do keep track of when I should be calling them or when they should be coming in.
Okay.
They called out the insurance company they have. We just need the copy of the slip.
Yeah.
So they have insurance.
They have it through May of 2024. Yeah.
And so the idea is when May
that comes
shows
up,
up, they send another one that's
Renewal.
for 2024, 2025.
Okay.
And
Isn't it in here?
I think he sent it.
Yeah, oh, I do have
He
it.
sent
It's in the packet. I got it just recently. I put it in the new packet that somebody
Yeah, it's on
have.
the page. Whatever.
The backside.
Backside.
yeah, that's to May.
May of 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any,
Oh, just one question. So just going into their application, they have to change their application? Are they going to send me a new application? Am I changing the numbers on this?
Usually they just
We gotta
give you a
agree.
certificate and show that they've updated their,
Okay.
before the 24th of May. Because a lot of the docs are like that.
Sure.
Ours is March.
I just have to change these so that I know from year to year what we do. So I just want to be clear that the total number is 58
And 6.
slips and 6 ramp skids.
Right. And
Okay,
so what they
that's all.
pay, we'll have to figure out how we
Yeah.
settle that or,
Yep.
yeah.
I'll figure that out. I just wanted to be clear
Or if
before.
it's switched, we'll get through that.
And we're also approving the extension that they might need.
Extension, which one?
Well, in their letter, they have an extension of 30 feet in the event that they'll,
No, what he's calling out is like Keith is being proactive in the sense of if the things dip, that's their idea. What I've informed some of the commercial bay owners is to start thinking about that because it's coming, right, in my head. Now, we're not acting on it. It's more or less Keith being proactive to say, hey, our plan would be just to push straight out and not change any configuration if it permits us, for that variance to do it.
So if I recall,
so
the pullback by, I think there's a date, but it's spring, is if it's below 922, and right now it's 922.15,
it's going to be there.
then we can put it into action. So try to have a plan ready to do that if it goes below 1.5 inches from what it currently is.
Okay, so Tallies does not have to come back and reapply.
We'd have everybody come back for a variance. I think Keith's just explaining what he would do because like some would reconfigure everything where he's just saying all I'm
She'll just
intending
go
on
out.
doing is to push straight out.
Okay.
Okay.
But they will need to come back.
We're going to make people come back
With
for a
variance.
variance for the low water, correct?
Carrie?
Is the motion not only for 64 slips, but also for the change in dock configuration? Because,
The diagram given,
Yeah.
okay.
the diagram in the application.
Okay, and so we have a motion and a second. We've had some discussion. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. That passes.
All right, the last one for LUC is number 6, Docks of White Bear Lake, commercial permit renewal, revised from last year. Again, as you can see in the application, all their docks have come in to 300 feet from ordinary high water and are in their ADUA. And they've asked for 250 boats, and the LUC approved it, and I so move.
Slips or boats? Mark?
Slips. I'll get it.
Second.
Okay. Okay, so we have motion and a second. Any discussion? I'll start. I noticed that some of the docks appear to be outside of or right at the ADUA line. And so the idea is that the applicant is committing to stay within the 300-foot ADUA.
Yeah.
And so cleaning up the figure to show that wouldn't have a lot of value at this point.
Right, and we had a discussion, McGoldrick and myself, where we made it clear those boats at the end, that is part of your length, so those things have to stay within the ADUA. So we're making the boundaries there where if there's a boat at the end where it is in this diagram, that will have to be within the 300 feet of your.
Okay, so we'll just have to make sure that when we send a surveyor out next spring, once the docks are in, that they pay attention to that. All right. Okay, any other discussion?
Question. I thought we had said in September that we were going to limit it to 240.
Yep.
Not 250.
Yeah. Historically, the board has approved 240. Historically, the Docks of White Bear have not complied with that. I think based on the boat counts or slip counts anyway. And this year we did we did also approve 10 as kind of a hardship because they had already sold them, and instead of making people move their boats, so that took it up to 250. But yes, the application is for 250 slips, and that's the motion, is to approve that 250 slips.
But I thought we had said we were not going to allow that.
That's right. That's right.
And we're going to just
I think that
allow
each
it?
one of us
We're going to vote.
Yeah, each one of us will vote on that.
And there's no, at one point in time, we were talking about the fact that they were over so many this last year, that would be taken from the number of boats this year in 224.
Yep, that is something that I think's in our ordinances now in some way.
And
Yep.
that's to help with this. So if once we have a number that we all agree on, because the DNR permit says 260, we're at 240. We're saying let's meet in the middle, 250. That's something that's now we say is on the permit. It's enforceable. That's the permit we have. Because we've even gone to Bob Fletcher, and Bob Fletcher's like, we've said, here, we need your help with this and that. And he's like, the DNR permit says this, and it's not enforceable. So what we're really trying to do is make progress to have a permit that we all agree on, where the McGoldricks ourselves, from the LUC and the board, we're like, this looks correct, and the boundaries are defined, and it's kind of self-governing, where it's like, I think that's about as much as they can fit in there.
And I think that, my opinion, is that it's likely the DNR will also be fine with the 250 slips.
They're fine with 260.
Right, but they maybe will only be fine with 250 this time around.
Okay.
Alan?
I'm not going to sound off on anything other than to just simply say that the DNR is waiting for the decision here because they're as excited about moving forward without having to worry about the number which way or the other two. So this is the year that permit is up for review.
I see.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, noted. All right, that passes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, Lake Education Committee, Scott?
We are preparing more information for the Laker publication. There's input due at the end of this month, and we've been getting a few slices of Sherry's time, all this other stuff that she's doing, so there's much appreciated. We understand that there will be a Laker next year, and we're going to start out with buoys as information for that. We don't have any further plans at this time. We got some very good information from the watershed district about chloride, and that'll be part of what we're doing right now because there's a lot that people can do about being careful with salt. Because once it gets into the lake, unless it gets diluted somehow, it stays there. So that'll be the basis of our current input for that. And that's all I have. Meredith, you have any social media update?
Sure. This next 2 months on our social media, I'm going to get the lake temperature and level up. I have a new graph of chloride in the lake from the Rice Creek Watershed District that's going to go on our social media, as well as in the Laker. I'll put a post up when the ice goes in with ice thickness guidelines to remind people of ice safety. We have a day our office is closed. I'll make a post about that, and probably some information from Steve McComas will go on our social media for public education. If anyone has anything they'd like to send to me to put up, I'd be happy to. Does anyone have any questions for Scott or me?
I don't have any question, but I appreciate that you're focusing on the chloride for this next one. That's, I think, super critical. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. And we're on to the treasurer's report. Mike.
November treasurer's report is before you. You can see all the things that are getting paid. Make a motion that we accept debit card purchase 18 and checks number 4909 through 4919.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion?
Just one comment, that if we're going to start this debit card numbering, that maybe we go, like, maybe this should be 23, or next year we start it at 2401, 2402. So we know then that that was the year and that was the debit card purchase.
Okay.
Instead of going up to like debit card 560 in 3 years.
Yeah, I think the idea is
Excellent
that
suggestion. If the powers that write those numbers down will do it, we're all set.
Yeah, and I think the idea at the moment, I think the idea was that we would just restart each year, so that January, the first debit card purchase would be one again. So then just making it year specific in the nomenclature like that, is that a hardship, Sherry?
It'll just make the type tinier because there's more letters in there, so.
Yeah.
I don't care. I just thought I'd bring it up. Just something in my head.
Okay. Forget that.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Okay, we have proposed December treasurer's report in front of you, and it's pretty complete, but there might be a couple odds and ends that come in. We're not sure. There usually is, and there might be some income that'll come in. We don't know. So I would like to make a motion that we pay $5,687.08 minimum for December, and that anything that comes in, we'll pay that. And in January, you will get a completed, updated December report.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve some expenditure for December, since we're not having a December meeting, and then the official treasurer's report will be handled at our January meeting. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes. Any questions for Mike? Okay. Board council report, Alan.
The board was actually excited to find a Ramsey County violation notice in my mailbox, thinking that maybe it was something from the lake. It was actually a 2014 case from Maplewood. So it was a warrant that came in, and so I got the notice for the appearance. So my excitement waned very quickly. That said, the lake was pretty slow in terms of enforcement. Nothing from the sheriff or the conservation officer. Sheriff makes sense because things are slowing down. Conservation officer nowadays makes a lot of sense because they're on deer patrol. So now they're really out enforcing that. So they're up in Carlos Avery, and you know, our guy not only does the water but also does the land. And so there is that. And of course, with nothing better to do, I had to come up with a question for Mr. McComas. And so I could paraphrase, but you could also call him back up. I did ask about Phragmites, which is something that we've been treating recently when Mike found out about those. And so I did ask the question, is that something that we need to be worried about long-term here? And without putting words in his mouth, I think he said the biggest challenge with those is the hybridization of the invasive with the native. And so that's what to watch out for, because they become sort of a freak and can really take over. So according to him, the management's going pretty well because they're amenable to treatment. And then if you remember last summer, maybe 2 summers ago, we had a citizen complain about yellow iris. And so I asked him about that and whether that was a serious threat to the lake and something to be watching out for. And apparently that's an ornamental. It's not very invasive. It certainly isn't native, but it's also not going to take over the lake. And so it's not something that we have to actively monitor. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So
Good job.
I will take my my McComas hat off and put my lawyer hat back on and ask for any questions. We will have, by the way, January, once we reconvene, we'll have the sheriff come in and summarize the enforcement year that was had by Ramsey County.
And could we have that happen in February?
If you so desire.
That's what we would like.
Then that's what we'll do.
All right. Okay, any questions for Alan?
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Announcements. It's me. I don't have any announcements. Sherry, do you have any announcements?
Just a couple. First of all, carpet installation is going to take place Monday, December 4th, so yay.
December 1st?
December 4th. December 4th. I do need help, just 1 or 2 people, a minimum of 1, just to move a couple more pieces of furniture on Friday, December 1st, preferably, if not Saturday, December 2nd. So if anybody is interested in helping me with that, I'd appreciate it. Just email me. I have enlisted help to put the furniture back on Tuesday, December 5th, so you're off that. Nobody has to worry about that. On the back of your packet, you receive the White Bear Lake Conservation District Board and LUC meeting dates. So you will see there that our first meeting then in January is going to be January 16th. And other dates are on there. Just thinking ahead, November 19th is probably a Thanksgiving week, so you may want to think if there's another date, just thinking ahead of that. Last but not least, the White Bear Lake or Conservation District office will be closed on Tuesday, December 12th, as I will be out of town. So just make note of that.
Okay, and will you send an email as we get closer? Well, I guess December 1st is coming right up, but will you still send an email a few days before just to prompt us on the move? Yeah. And then on the office closure, will we put something on the website or? Okay.
Or and
okay.
Social media.
Okay. Any questions for Sherry? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Well, I'll make a motion to adjourn, and we have a second. And no, that's all right. So a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Holy shit, was that